You may know you are listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Izzy House hosts a great podcast called the Space Marketing Podcast. Izzy, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Space Marketing Podcast is where we explore marketing principles, strategies, and tactics through the lens of space. I talk space with some very interesting industry professionals about their challenges and successes with marketing in the new commercial space economy. This show is for business leadership, entrepreneurs, and the space curious.
Wow. And where in the universe can people subscribe?
All of the major channels, and you can also find it on MPN and spacemarketingpodcast.com.
You heard her. Go subscribe. You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Keith Smith hosts a great podcast called the Fuel Podcast. Keith, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Fuel is all about the advertising business. It's like Mad Men for the ears. Every show, I pick on a hot topic to discuss or interview a celebrity from the world of British and American advertising. We chat about all sorts of things, and I try and uncover the real person behind the image using just my powerful charm, incisive wit, and incredible humility.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
Wherever they normally get their podcasts, from Apple, Google, Spotify, the MPN website, or just visit my website at thefuelpodcast.com.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Tom Suharto.
You don't need to be anyone else to have A, successful career in our world of creativity and marketing, but B, just to have an impact in culture. All you need is already inside you. It's just trying to figure out, how to get out of your own way and sometimes help the clients get out of their own way to hear something kind of real and true.
Tom Suharto leads global strategy at Forsman Bodenfors, one of the most creatively awarded agencies of the past decade. His clients at Forsman include Volvo, Polestar, Crocs, Goldman Sachs, Bailey's, and H&M, to name a few. Before joining Forsman, Tom spent a decade at Wieden+Kennedy, starting in their Shanghai office, where he helped to launch Shanghai Disneyland and led strategy on Nike China. Then in Portland, Oregon, where he worked on Nike Women and Just Do It campaigns, helped launch Samsung flagship phones, and led strategy on Facebook groups. Tom, welcome to On Brand.
It's great to be here, Nick. Thanks very much for having me.
I'm excited to chat. I've got to ask the dorky fanboy question first.
Go for it.
And it's a surprising fanboy question because the Crocs brand is having a moment, I would say.
Yeah.
And I would assume brand side as well. Case in point, I took my daughter to New York where I had some speaking. And it was her first time in New York, Empire State Building, Central Park, all sorts of things that we saw. She was most excited about that Crocs store in Manhattan. And she left with multiple. We bought one pair, went back to the hotel, we packed light, and she said, I really want another pair. I'm like, how are you going to get them? She did the folding and squishing and got another pair of Crocs in that bag. So the masses are swarming. And it's really kind of makes me think about it. Believe it or not, I'm going to actually back into a relevant brand question beyond Nick's travel adventures. And what a dynamic, sometimes you see brand highs and lows over many, many decades. And it really seems like there's been some big swings. I had a pair and was made fun of by some of my older kids, and was embarrassed about the Crocs brand in its first iteration. And now my cool teenage son, who's an athlete, it's like the go-to fashion-forward choice. How do you ride that wave?
Yeah, it's quite the journey. I think they've ridden that wave consistently and authentically, and I think that's sort of what's really helped them. A lot of factors really leaned into their favor. The pandemic being probably one of the biggest ones in terms of just people really prioritizing comfort in their lives. But besides that, I think that we've kind of moved into a world where, being unapologetic, not necessarily following trends, being your own person, is more valued than ever. And I think they, in a way, just sort of became a symbol to that to a lot of people. Not to mention, they're really fun and they're really comfortable. They look cool. Or I guess cool in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, I think that they've done a lot to almost like really try and push the boundaries of self-expression, which has really benefited their brand. We talk a lot with them around this idea of polarization and how important that is. I think in building relationships with people, a lot of marketers might be a little skittish on sort of ideas that are like intentionally polarizing. But I think they've really seen the benefits of like being very something, whether you like it or not. You'd almost rather have a brand that has some people who love it and hate it rather than just being a brand that no one loves or hates. And it turns out, the more polarizing they've been, the more people that have been attracted to them. It's been quite the turnaround, but an incredibly fun brand to work with and collaborate with.
That's such an important point too, because I think, it's said a lot, but it bears repeating. The idea that the opposite is not, the high interest isn't that negative energy. It's the apathy. It's if you're a brand that people just don't care. And Crocs is a great example of that, because it always sort of had people had a feeling about it, but it's remarkable how that feeling has shifted, especially when you look at other brand reinventions. I don't know why, but like Old Spice came to mind, and I always tell the story because the first place I ever saw a bottle of Old Spice was in my grandpa's bathroom, so I thought of it kind of as this old man brand. But then they kind of cooled it up. But they changed the product design and brand voice. And I think an important constant, as I really go deep on the subject of Crocs, is that Crocs themselves have always been who they are. It's not like they came back with a jazzy rock and roll Croc. It is the Crocs are a constant.
Yeah, I think people can see through these days, see through pretty well if you're trying to be something you're not. Another story about Old Spice. What I heard, through the grapevine, we had it at Wieden for a lot of that time of the turnaround. The legend is that they wanted to. They were even considering being called New Spice at one point.
Oh,
But the I think the awesome work we did at Wieden was really trying to find a truth about them. It was centered around this idea of navigating the seas of manhood, and something that, their audience, kids going through puberty, like needed help with. And then we did it in a really, entertaining, fun way that did build a voice. But it was rooted in this idea of, they've seen a lot, their experience, and they can help their audience get there. So yeah, I think it's a huge part to me in trying to figure out a brand voice is like what's true, what matters to people, what people pay attention to, and you can add value to their lives if you talked about it and stood for something. And it's easier said than done, but I think finding that thing and then making that thing interesting is probably at the core of it.
Well, and I think even if no one admits it or claims it, that New Spice concept has the feeling of that thing that could be said at a meeting by someone. But that's kind of the equivalent of the jazzed up change of something, but really thinking about how that's rooted in who you are. You talked about being at Wieden, and I thought I'd mention, just because it's been a few weeks since Dan's passing, and just really one of the giants of the industry. Do you just with that proximity, do you have any stories, any insights that you'd like to share on kind of this amazing figure in our industry?
I mean, I think where I had a few meetings with him, and we'd see him in the hallways and stuff. I wasn't one of the ones that had maybe the closest inner circle type relationship with Dan, but his vision and what he tried to build and his beliefs of surrounding creativity were infused into that place. And the thing that I always think about and take away a lot when it comes to myself, but also how I want to build teams and work with others is I think he really believed that you don't need to be anyone else to have a successful career in our world of creativity and marketing, but B, just to have an impact in culture. I think a lot of us are probably dogged by imposter syndrome. It's something most people struggle with. But he really built a place on the belief that all you need is already inside you. It's just trying to figure out, how to get out of your own way and sometimes help the clients get out of their own way to hear something kind of real and true. And so I don't know, that's sort of what I try and hold on from that place. I spent 9-10 years there. So it was sort of ingrained in the waters there. And then you step out of that place and you realize, well, it's not like that everywhere else. So I think that's the thing I hold on to.
Well, that idea too, because it kind of connects with what we were just talking about, getting out of one's way is important advice, not always easy advice to follow or to kind of listen for. I feel like, especially you mentioned imposter syndrome, but other things that show up. Our tendency is to think that it's an additive process, that we have to add all of this stuff in. And even in that Old Spice example that you talked about of getting out of the way and seeing the experience from this is critical, but hard. Is there any advice for getting out of one's way?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times, especially with DE&I efforts, I'm mixed race, Asian American, so I sort of think about this a lot. But I think that we really want to hire diverse folks and staff, and I think the key thing is people with lots of different lived experiences. But it's one thing to hire them; it's another thing to do you have the culture and conditions where you can sort of put that to use, where you get the benefit of all these different people's lived experiences, and it's easier said than done, But I do think getting to the point where you can see your lived experience as a real competitive advantage is something that, really can add to the texture of the work you're putting out there, whether it's strategic or creative or whatever. I think a lot of branding and brand building is trying to humanize brands, especially in digital world where, again, you can kind of see through things as being flimsy or corporate or try hard. I think that level of humanity to brands is really important. And I think that comes from having a team of real people, working on it, and people who feel empowered to put themselves and their lived experience into the work.
On Brand, we'll be right back after this.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Jonathan Gaby hosts a great podcast called Marketing Distilled. He's the master distiller. Jonathan, tell us what these fine folks are going to get out of listening.
On Marketing Distilled, you'll hear from industry experts and me to learn about more marketing things and taking those complex things and distill them down into actionable strategies or tactics.
Amazing. Where can people subscribe?
You can find the show at marketingpodcast.net or search for Marketing Distilled wherever you get your podcast.
You heard him. Go subscribe. You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Tim Hines hosts a great podcast called the Marketing Starter Podcast. Tim, tell these fine folks what they're going to get when they listen.
They're going to get great insights on how marketers can take an entrepreneurial attitude to what they do in marketing to be a little bit more successful. So I interview top marketers from all around the world, and heck, even some that are bottom and middle. It's really about marketers who embody the entrepreneurial spirit to be the best that they can be.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
They can, of course, subscribe on marketingpodcast.net, but they can also search for the show on all their favorite podcasting platforms, as well as visiting my website, which is tnhines.com/podcast.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
Now, back to the show. So, speaking of easier said than done, it comes up all the time. Speaking of things in our boardroom conversations, it's that echo of, like Nike with "just do it," and it always causes. I feel like, at least for me personally, there's a lot more that went into that, and in terms of delivering on that. But say you're working on a campaign like that, how is there any demystifying there as well, in terms of how that campaign is kind of continue? I mean, we call it a campaign, but it's certainly one of the longest tenured campaigns of marketing message that I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I tend to use it with other clients or other situations, there is a real simplicity to it. It's sort of having a having a point of view. This happens to be a really memorable, quippy, incredibly successful tagline, but it is a point of view that when things get tough, we all have the potential inside ourselves to overcome adversity, whether that's getting off a couch or standing for equality or whatever it might be. It's about potential and our ability to move forward in life. So I think at that point, once you kind of know what you stand for, it's about figuring out what's the context we put it in. Just do it itself doesn't mean anything. It requires context and attention point to sort of say, just do what, and I think that is a helpful way of looking at just do it. It's sort of having a belief, but needing a context culturally to put it in, or an audience to speak to, or a moment to meet, whatever it might be. So that point of view takes on even like bigger meaning. So that's one way I look at just do it and try to apply it to other situations. The other thing I would say is, Nike's all about the athlete voice, and just do it is kind of the athlete perspective. And if you know your audience really well, if you even can like speak for them in some ways, or be of them, then it's about speaking athlete to athlete. We say that all the time. So I think other brands, finding the equivalent of the audience you are both part of, authentically, incredibly, but also want to lead and take places, is how do you speak to them as that you get them, and that you see the world in a similar way.
Thank you for eloquently answering a question that I feel like I stumbled to answer or to ask rather,
No
because that's exactly what looking for there, in terms of it's so often cited as this touchstone, as this go-to. But there's some important foundational steps that a lot of times you can't replicate. Talking about knowing your audience, talking about the context, the moment that matters, all of these things, I think, are important aspects behind why something like that works, which I feel like isn't always thought of when that is cited. In talking about your role leading global strategy, as we are wrapping up a year where I struggle with how to talk about where we're at with with things long term. It seems like it is normal-ish. Or the ultimate eye roll of the new normal. But in looking at planning strategy for another year ahead, it's a little bit different, because the past 2 years, I feel like we were heading into uncertainty in both of those years. So in looking at strategy work moving into this, what challenges do you find folks thinking about?
Well, honestly, I feel like uncertainty is around the corner, especially recession related. Whether budgets are really going to be there, how consumers are going to be spending their time and money and attention. I think a lot of that stuff is a little up for grabs. I saw the other day Apple has a hiring freeze, and if the most profitable company of all time is worried about it, I think most of our clients are going to be as well. So I think strategy does have a really important role to figure out priorities. I think this balance that clients are constantly trying to figure out between, brand messaging, things that are more enduring and values to stand for, versus, what you're selling, what you're trying to get people to pay attention to in the moment and purchase. I think those are things that, depending on the brand, depending on their situation, whether they're incumbents or challengers or whatnot, I think strategies in turbulent times is about priority setting, jobs to be done, and maybe in the uncertainty, in the unpredictability, offering some sense of we're some steady ground that we can be sure of, that either we want to own, or we know to be true about our audience, or we can be confident about in culture that we want to get after.
That's again another. You're knocking them out of the park here, but I think talking about strategy in turbulent times is, I mean, that alone, I like wrote that down as you were saying that, and I was like, that's such an important way to think about it. So when it comes to our work, brand building, what do some of the in turbulent, I mean, the extension of that is brand building in turbulent times. How do you prioritize the work there when so much of it, there are some big swings between what is long-term brand building and what's maybe short-term revenue driving?
Well, I think there's, probably a magic question, $1 million question,
Yeah, exactly.
But I'd say there's some things that I turn to. First, I would say is about audience. If you really know your audience and can know how you can add value to them, whether it's creating culture with them, or being entertaining with them, or even just a rock solid value proposition that maybe saves them a bit of money. I think really knowing your audience, the value you provide, and leaning into that, because I think brands adding value to people is not going to go out of style, especially in recessionary times. And then the other thing I would say is, I always go back to culture as well. If you know what you stand for, you know your point of view, you can be sort of watching and listening and paying attention to culture and find moments to matter then as well. It may be that spending a lot of money on a big TV campaign isn't, maybe that is where you should be cutting. But I do think, again, being relevant in culture and adding value to your audience always, I think, are important.
That's such a great point, and also the relevance too, because I feel like sometimes over the past couple of years, the brand stuff, gets that look, and people can see it as non-essential, but there's an incredible long-term necessary value when it comes to, here's a dramatic turn of the phrase, brand survival.
Yeah. I think brands are enduring. That's kind of the point, right? Is to build a relationship that can endure and can be resilient, maybe over the course of time, or a need to call customer service once or return a product at a time. But I think that building that brand value is pretty important. Most of the data says that it's the work I think most consumers actually like engaging with. But yeah, I don't see the investment in brand going away. I hope not. It might be a little bit reduced, but I hope it doesn't.
Well, and that's I mean, it sort of feels, I don't exactly know how the metaphor can get there, but it feels like it's one of those things that we as businesses would file under making sure that we're putting our own mask on as well, because it does seem like it's one of those essential things that adds up, and for any short-term gains by minimizing those efforts certainly seems like it it could end up hurting in the long run.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Tom, as we start to wrap up, it is time for me to ask you for a brand that has made you smile recently.
Yeah, no, I love this question. And I was thinking about it. I actually thought about a brand that made my kids smile, which in turn made me smile. But I always think if you can get to the kids, it's a good thing. But my kids the other day were enchanted by the opportunity to go to the nearby mall, which is the American Dream Mall for us. I live in New Jersey. I don't know if you know about this thing. It's a giant facility near Giant Stadium or MetLife Stadium. And in that mall, they opened the first ever IRL Mr. Beast Burger restaurant. You aware of this?
No. Yeah, do tell.
Yeah. So, Mr. Beast, the YouTuber, he's ventured into fast food. And for a while, there are all these like ghost kitchens that you would order. And we actually did order once, and I picked it up in some random convenience store a few towns over. But now he has got this like branded, beautiful Mr. Beast burger restaurant. So my kids were really pumped about it. We went there, and it was a really awesome experience. Yeah, I'm a pescatarian. They happen to have Impossible Burger on the menu. Nice. I was excited about that. The food was not bad, but it was really cool because there's an entire merch store. There's these like wall of TVs that have his content playing kind of in the background. It was like this thoroughly modern moment where, my kids were really into a brand. They were sold before they didn't care even what the food tastes like. We have the creator economy being mixed up with, brick and mortar malls. And it was sort of this like confluence of a lot of ideas that I think about and talk about, with clients, but then you're kind of sitting in the middle of it in the moment. So that was really cool for me.
Well, that's a great smile. And ironic, you talked about early on, you said makes the kids smile, which in turn makes you smile. And as a parent myself, that's how I started the interview with
exactly.
Crocs being that brand for my daughter and my kids. And it has a great impact and a big smile on my face talking about it even now. Tom, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I mean, check out our website. You can Forsman Bodenfors, or it's forsman.com. And I'm on the LinkedIn's. You can look me up, Tom Suharto. Reach out. Love to chat and get to know folks.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which, as always, folks can find at onbrandpodcast.com. Tom, thanks for being on brand with us.
Thank you so much, Nick.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.